Hi, this is Rich Gerard. As you know, our mission here at Gerard at Large is to connect local people, places, and things by bringing you news from our own backyard. Did you know that GoffstownToday.com has a similar mission? So when we want to know what's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, we go to GoffstownToday.com.
Hi, this is Bill Wynne, publisher of GoffstownToday.com. If it's happening in Goffstown, Ware, Dunbarton, or New Boston, even in Pinardville, you can find out about it on GoffstownToday.com. If we know about it, you should too.
Our large time is 6:41. Joining us in studio now is Scott Gross. He is a selectman here in the town of Goffstown. He's also the Board of Selectmen's representative to the Budget Committee. As we continue to delve deep into the Goffstown budget and various matters, Scott is good enough to be with us this morning. Good morning. So what do I call you? Scott?
You call me Scott. That would be great.
All right. We'll just get you a little closer to the microphone there. And if we need to adjust it up, let us know.
Sure.
So, Scott, there are some things that you want to make sure people are aware of before town meeting day, which is a week from today.
Right.
And so why don't we start with those?
Sure. Thank you, Rich, for having me on the show. Obviously, I want to try to get out as much information as possible to the voters because next week is Election Day in Goffstown. And unfortunately, we only get about 20% voter turnout, 80 to 90% during a presidential election or primary, but only 20% for a town election.
Now, your town elections are nonpartisan, right?
That's correct. So, this is an opportunity for people to weigh in on school and town issues. I'm here to talk about town issues. Predominantly, we have our town budget and we have our town warrant articles, all of which, impact the day-to-day lives of our citizens. So it's important that they educate themselves on what the issues are.
All right. So for a city kid like me who has a board of mayor and aldermen that deals with all of this stuff, what is a warrant article and how does the town budget work?
Sure. Well, first, let me start off with, the process. There is an operating budget. Department heads present their portions of that, but their budgets to the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen goes through that, makes their adjustments, goes before a budget committee as well. The budget committee also.
So you develop a budget as the Board of Selectmen.
Correct.
And that budget gets forwarded to the budget committee. And the budget committee, fair to say, is pretty much free to do what it sees fit with the budget?
The law actually states that the budget committee is the one that presents the budget. And there are some times when the Board of Selectmen and the Budget Committee might have a difference of opinion or different budgets.
Okay. Now, how big is the town operating budget?
About $19.4 million.
So roughly half the size of your school budget is what you spend on everything other than schools.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about $19.4 million. Is that up or down from the prior year?
Believe it or not, the budget is down from some prior years. We've been below $20 million for the last about 3 years now. So last year we got a default budget, obviously, so that had a fairly large impact. But we've tried to keep it as fairly stable as possible. And it's a challenge because, as you know, you've probably had people on your show. There have been changes at the state level with respect to retirement contributions. We've all seen increases in fuel oil, energy costs, things of that nature. So it is a challenge to try to keep these budgets as flat as possible. And what that means ultimately is you have to forego or defer things that you want to do that you need to do, but you defer them. And one of the things that we've been deferring over the last 4 or 5 years during these more challenging economic times is our roads. We have spent a lot less on our roads than in years past. We were spending about $2 to $2.2 million on our road infrastructure. Last year, we only had in our budget $500,000 for road reclamation, whereas before we had $2 million. So those are that's one of the biggest areas where you're seeing some of the cost shifting.
Okay. And now what is a default budget?
A default budget is basically last year's budget plus or minus any one-time expenditures, and then you add in any contractual obligations that the town may have entered into through either a contract or a vote of its citizens, such as contracts, things like that.
Does that include labor union contracts?
Yes, it does. So
the way it works in the town, just so I'm clear on this, is that if the town there are basically two budgets. There's a default budget, which is what you just mentioned, last year's budget plus any contractual increases minus any one-time expenses from that prior year?
Correct.
And then there's what the Board of Selectmen recommends or what the Budget Committee recommends.
It's generally In this particular case, it's both the Budget Committee and the Selectmen are recommending it. The number on the ballot is always the Budget Committee's number.
Okay. So now, if you were talking about various budgetary pressures, and I'm curious about this, what is the incentive of your town employees to negotiate better deals if they can more or less rely on a default budget that always funds the increases that they have built into their contracts into the spending plan?
That's a great question. It's a segue actually to one of our articles, which is Article 12. We have a Department of Public Works labor contract in our warrant articles, Article number 12. And I think the employees that I have bargained with and the employees that I know understand that these are, they're challenging economic times. And in this particular contract, they've done a couple of different things. First and foremost, they're going to be contributing more towards their health insurance, 10% more towards the premiums. That's one. And then one of the big. How
much are they contributing now?
They are paying 10% now for families, 0 for singles. So if you're a single male at DPW, the town was paying 100% of your insurance. Under this contract, they will be paying 90% and the employee contributes 10%. So we're making some slow progress. But one of the bigger portions of this particular contract is that we're going more towards a pay for performance. So as you know from being on the mayor, board, and alderman, a lot of these contracts have what's called steps and COLA adjustments.
Yeah, longevity steps.
Right.
Automatic pay raises.
Right. And what this is driving towards is more of a pay for performance. So you are eligible for either a 1 to 3% increase based upon your performance. So you're not automatically going to get a step of 3% and a cost of living adjustment of 1 or 2 or 3%. This, in my opinion, is a good step in the right direction.
Well, if you're eligible for 1 to 3%, then aren't you automatically guaranteed?
You're guaranteed 1. That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And why guarantee anything?
Well, I think
is it true pay for performance if you're always guaranteeing some? I know it's only 1%, but
yeah, I think that's a valid question. And what I try to explain to people is that labor contracts or negotiations with bargaining units I look at it as a slow and measured progress. And I think this is a good step in the first direction. I mean, you're bargaining for these things, and people have to agree to them. And same thing with these contributions to health insurance or changes of plans, because that's another thing that this labor union and other labor unions have done is not only have they accepted some higher co-payments, but the changes of plans, they're going to plans which require higher co-pays to go to the doctor, prescription drugs. So they've recognized that the town needs to make some adjustments, and I think that they've stepped up to that degree. Do I think that there's more room to go? Personally, me as an individual, yes, I do. I think I would like to see us get to a more of an 80-20 situation where the employer pays 80, maybe the employee pays 20%. But this is a 3-year contract. It was supported by the Board of Selectmen 5-0, by the Budget Committee 13-1. And I think it's a good step in the right direction.
Trial-large time is 6:48. We are in studio with Scott Gross. He is a selectman in the town of Goffstown and a member of their budget committee, appointed by the Board of Selectmen to sit on the budget committee. And we're going over some of the details. Now, there has been some controversy, which we here at Trial-large surfaced, regarding the use of so-called undesignated fund balance. There are some, if I recall correctly, Budget Committee member John Burt, who thinks that money ought to be returned to the taxpayers, and Elizabeth DeBrule, they were on the show, as you know, in a bit of a tete-a-tete, a debate, and she was perfectly okay with spending the dough. I don't know where you stand on it, but I'll be honest with you, not entirely certain how it works and what's involved. So hopefully you can step us through the process. What are these undesignated fund balances, or I would call them surpluses? Where are they? What are they being used for? And why aren't they being returned to the taxpayers if they are, in fact, leftover money from the operating budget?
Sure. The term that most people have heard before, if they follow government, is called unreserved fund balance. Now that they're calling it an unassigned fund balance. And long story short, it's an accounting term.
It's leftover money.
It's not all net leftover money. It is unanticipated revenues and unspent monies from a budget. So you could have a situation such as this year where we had about $200,000 of unspent monies from our budget, but $300,000 in monies that
unexpected
were not
revenue.
Unexpected revenue.
So you have $500,000 sitting there, and this is in the town operating budget.
This is not a separate fund per se. Like I said, it's more. I know they hate when I say this, the accountants, but it's more or less the balance of your checking account, because
Right.
you do have different funds. But long story short, you need a healthy fund balance for several purposes. One, if you're to bond outside of, say, the New Hampshire Bond Bank, it helps your bonding capacity. It also deals with a cash flow. So just like you need a certain balance on your checking account, you need a certain fund balance so that when the school district comes knocking on your door because they have to pay out $1.5 million in a particular period, the town is the one who collects the taxes. So we have to then disperse those funds. So just for the sake of history,
we're familiar with that.
For the sake of history, our fund balance in 2006 was $2.3 million, and our target at that time was around $3 million. And I say target. The Department of Revenue suggests that you have a minimum 8% of this fund balance, and that's for, like I said, cash flow purposes, unforeseen emergencies, Mother's Day floods, those types of things. And over the years, we have seen that grow, and at the end of this fiscal year, we're at $5.4 million.
So you've got $5.4 million basically in the town piggy bank as a result of unexpected revenues and unexpended funds over a series of years then.
Over a series of the last, say, 7 years, but it was underfunded. It was under what the goal was up until about the last 3 to 4 years. So our accountants came in and they gave us our audit findings, which the last several years have been outstanding. And we asked them about this fund balance and said it's a very healthy fund balance. And essentially, they suggested if you wanted to, you could spend some of the fund balance for what they consider a one-time capital expenditures, not to use it
not
for,
to subsidize operating
correct,
expenses,
because that's bad. That's bad
Right.
policy. So that's kind of what we endeavored this year. But I wanted to let the folks know last year and in years prior to that, the selectmen used the fund balance to try to stabilize the tax rate. And in prior years, they might have used $500,000 of this fund balance to keep taxes as stable as possible. You don't want a roller coaster ride of your taxes going up and down 10, 20%. So they use it to stabilize that. So this year we have 4 warrant articles that deal with this unassigned fund balance, and we're using those funds to pay for those particular items.
So if those items pass,
there will be no tax impact. We're not raising taxes because, like you said before, a portion of this money has already been raised by taxation.
Right.
The other portion has been raised or put into that fund through unanticipated revenue.
Well, let me ask you a quick question here then. Why, if it's unexpended tax dollars, I know there's some, unexpected revenues in there too, why not simply return it to the taxpayers? Why not, in these times, why not use them to lower the tax rate?
And we have done that in the past, and this is what
but not this year.
This year, we're looking to, as I've explained to many folks over the years, we have a lot of backlog in what's called our capital improvements program. Our roads are one of those things. Our equipment and machinery. We used to spend $3.5 million on these capital items. This last year, we spent around $1.5 million. So we have quite a backlog. Our thought process in the Board of Selectmen was to follow the advice of our auditors and use about $800,000 of this unassigned fund balance for these very important projects.
So $800,000 for various capital projects.
Capital projects.
All 4 warrant articles pass, that $800,000 would be spent. If they don't pass, or any one of them doesn't pass, what happens to the funds there?
Then it would remain in the unassigned fund balance, and then when the selectmen meet, typically in September or October, they will talk about what they want to spend from the unassigned fund balance to offset the tax rate for the following year. So there's always that opportunity, again, to do that. But like I said, I'd like to urge the voters to, check out our website, www.goffstown.com, to check out the budget on all the warrant articles. And you should have received a flyer from the town which lists all the warrant articles and an explanation. And last but not least, Rich, if anybody has a question, give me a call at my house, 497-5046. Again, Scott Gross, I'm your selectman, 497-5046.
497-5046 to speak with Selectman Scott Gross if you have any questions on any of the budget items or warrant articles pending. Goffstown.com, that's the town's website. That's where you can learn more as well. Scott, thanks for joining us here this morning.
Thank you very much, Rich, for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
Glad to have you. Yeah, I wish we had a little more time with Scott this morning, but I wanted to get to the movement that seems to be afoot to write him in to the open seat on the Budget Committee. He says he's not doing anything to encourage it, but if elected, I guess he'll serve as long as they change it to Wednesday nights, the meetings, when they used to be held on the Budget Committee. And I would just urge caution. I haven't seen the language, but, Manchester went to a so-called merit pay system. And what we found is that our 0 to 3% automatically gave 90% of our city's employees 3% pay raises. And it proved to be a devastating thing for our budget. So the devils are in the details, and people ought to grab that contract and read it carefully to make sure that the mistake Manchester made is not replicated here in the town of Goffstown. Once again, our thanks to Scott Gross for coming in and shedding some light on what's at stake in the Goffstown election a week from today. Coming up next, the news. It all starts right now.
WLMW 90.7 FM.
It's uplifting and powerful, and it's a good message all around.
New Hampshire Family Radio.
It's just a good station to listen to.